All right, so let's dive into something that I know a lot of folks are thinking about.
Okay.
What if Trump wins a second term?
Yeah.
How would Europe, especially, how would they have to navigate that world? And
Right.
we're not here to like predict the future or anything,
Yeah.
but we can explore some possibilities based on what we already know
Right.
about Trump's America First agenda
Yeah, yeah.
and how that played out during his first term.
Exactly.
It's kind of like a choose your own adventure, but geopolitical.
I like that.
And we're going to look at what the ripple effects might be across the pond.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it.
So,
Really looking at how global power dynamics might be reshaped,
yeah.
particularly between the U.S. and Europe,
Yeah.
And, his victory speech definitely hinted at a continuation of that America First approach.
Right.
So let's unpack that a little
Okay,
bit.
so America First, more than just a slogan.
Yeah, yeah.
What are the core principles and what are some clues maybe from his first term
Right.
that might suggest how he would apply it in a second term?
America First is
Yeah.
really about, putting U.S. interests first,
Right.
above all else.
Yeah.
Even if it means shaking things up a little bit,
Right.
disrupting the way things have always been done.
Yeah.
And it's really a mix of economic nationalism,
Right.
protecting American jobs and industries,
Yeah.
and also a skepticism of these global institutions and agreements
Right.
that he doesn't see as serving American interests,
Right. And we saw this play out in his first term
Absolutely.
in some pretty big ways. I mean,
Yes.
the pressure on NATO allies
Oh, yeah,
to increase their defense spending.
for sure.
The tariffs he imposed on goods from China,
Mm.
and then the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement.
Exactly.
These were huge moves
Yes, they were.
that really sent shockwaves,
Set ripples throughout the international community, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think these actions really signal that Trump sees these global interactions as a zero-sum game.
Right.
If the U.S. wins, someone else has to lose.
Right.
And that has big implications for how he might engage with Europe in a second term.
Okay, so let's zero in on Europe.
Okay.
If America First 2.0 is what we're working with here,
Right.
what are some of the biggest challenges that Europe might face? It feels like it could get complicated.
Definitely. One of the most immediate concerns would be security.
Okay.
I mean, he's repeatedly called NATO obsolete
Right.
and complained that the U.S. carries too much of the burden
Yeah.
when it comes to European defense.
Yeah.
And a second term could see him, really doubling down on that
Right.
and demanding even more
Right.
from those European nations
In
terms of military spending and contributions.
So imagine Europe having to seriously ramp up its military capabilities. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine, right?
It is, yeah.
I mean, for decades, they've relied so heavily on the U.S.
Right.
Would this push them towards a more independent, like, EU defense force?
Right.
What would that even look like?
Yeah, that's the crucial question. It's not just about, spending more money.
Right.
It's about potentially reshaping the whole European security
Mm.
architecture.
Right.
We could see countries like France and Germany, who already have strong militaries, taking the lead.
Yeah.
But that requires a level of coordination and cooperation within the EU
Right.
that we haven't seen before.
Right.
And let's be realistic.
Yeah.
There would be some serious financial and political, ramifications to that.
Yeah.
Some countries might not want to shoulder the burden,
Right.
and that could lead to divisions within the EU.
It's like this hypothetical situation is making Europe answer these questions about its own identity,
Absolutely.
its place in the world. It's a huge undertaking.
Huge, yeah.
But security is not the only thing. That might get complicated.
Right.
What about trade?
Trade is another potential flashpoint.
Yeah.
Trump is a protectionist,
Right.
and he hasn't been shy about criticizing what he sees as unfair trade practices
Right.
by European nations.
Yeah. And I mean,
Remember those tariffs on steel and aluminum imports?
yeah,
That was just a taste of what a second term could bring.
the trade wars,
Yeah,
so much disruption and uncertainty. It
Yeah.
makes me nervous just thinking about it.
I understand.
What could happen to European economies,
Well,
especially since they're so intertwined with the U.S.?
we could see tariffs extended to a wider range of European goods,
Okay.
potentially impacting key industries.
Yeah.
Automobiles, agriculture, technology.
Right.
This could really restrict their access to the U.S. market,
Right.
which is a big deal,
Yeah.
considering how much trade happens across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And of course, it wouldn't be one-sided.
Right.
American consumers might see higher prices for European goods,
Mm.
and that would just fuel more economic tension.
It's like a domino effect, you know?
It is.
One protectionist measure leads to another.
Yeah.
Both sides end up losing.
Exactly.
And it's not just about the money, right?
No, it's not.
I mean, doesn't this hurt the relationship?
It erodes the foundation of trust
Yeah.
and cooperation,
Yeah.
which is really crucial
Yeah.
for addressing all these global challenges.
It's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got potential security issues,
Yeah.
trade conflicts brewing,
Right.
but there's another piece of this we haven't talked about yet.
Okay.
Europe's balancing act with China and Russia.
Right.
This is where it gets really interesting.
This is where the geopolitical chessboard gets complex.
Yeah.
I mean, Europe has strong economic ties with both China and Russia,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to energy.
Right.
But a more assertive U.S. under Trump,
Right.
potentially even confrontational,
Yeah.
could force Europe to make some tough choices.
So imagine Trump ramps up the pressure on China.
Okay.
More sanctions, a more aggressive stance in the South China Sea.
Right.
Europe's stuck in the middle.
Right.
Do they side with the U.S., their longstanding ally?
Yeah.
Or do they risk those economic partnerships?
Yeah. It's a real dilemma.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers.
No.
Do they prioritize economic interests or security alliances?
Right.
Could this push Europe closer to China and Russia?
Yeah.
Fracture the transatlantic alliance?
Right.
These are the questions European leaders would be grappling with.
It's like they'd be walking a tightrope, trying to balance
Yeah.
all these different interests and potential conflicts.
Absolutely.
One wrong step,
Yeah,
big consequences.
for sure.
And we can't forget about the potential impact on European politics.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, we're already seeing the rise of populism and nationalism
Yeah.
in several European countries.
Yeah.
And a Trump victory could really embolden them. It's like another ripple effect
It is, yeah.
spreading out.
His rhetoric and policies resonate with some of these groups,
Yeah.
especially on issues like immigration, national sovereignty, globalization.
Right.
A second term could give them more momentum,
Right.
and that could lead to real challenges
Sure.
for the EU's cohesion and stability,
It's like we're talking about a political earthquake
potentially.
with aftershocks rippling across the continent.
Yeah.
How would this shift in European politics
Right.
impact everything
Yeah.
from immigration policies to economic cooperation?
Yeah.
Things are getting more and more complex.
They are. Yeah, it could, imagine more European countries start implementing like stricter border controls or they
Right.
start pushing back against EU regulations.
Yeah.
It could lead to more friction
Right.
and make it harder for the EU to present a united front
Right.
on the world stage, especially when dealing with China and Russia.
So it's not just about individual countries making their own moves.
Right.
It's about how all of that impacts the EU as a whole.
Exactly. And think about the ripple effects
Right.
on things like climate change
Yeah.
or trade negotiations.
Yes.
A more fragmented Europe, more inward looking,
Right.
would have less power in those discussions
Right.
and might struggle to advocate for its own interests.
Yeah. It's like the whole strength in numbers thing.
Exactly.
And if Europe is divided, it loses its voice.
Loses its voice, yeah.
And then there's the impact on transatlantic relations.
Right.
If Europe is less aligned with U.S. interests
Yeah.
and starts going its own way,
Right.
it could really strain that relationship even further.
It really could.
It's like this is putting a magnifying glass
Yeah.
on all those existing tensions.
Yeah, it highlights the potential for divergence.
Yeah.
But, we've been focusing on the risks and challenges.
Yeah.
What about the other side of the coin?
Okay. Yeah.
Could any of these challenges actually be good for Europe?
Yeah, it does feel like we've been doom and gloom.
Yeah, a bit.
Is there a silver lining here?
Well, maybe, sometimes a crisis can lead to positive change.
Right.
It's like a caterpillar being pushed out of its cocoon.
Okay. I like that.
Uncomfortable at first,
Yeah.
but ultimately necessary
To transform, yeah.
for transformation, right?
So how could this hypothetical second Trump term
Yeah.
force Europe to come out of its cocoon?
Well, the security concerns we've talked about
Yeah.
could push Europe to get serious about its own defense,
Okay.
develop a more cohesive military.
Right.
It's been debated in the EU for a long time,
Yeah.
but maybe this would create the urgency
Right.
to actually do something.
So instead of relying on the U.S., Europe steps up,
Yeah,
takes charge.
right.
Would that mean a full-fledged EU army?
I don't think we'd see that happen overnight,
Right.
but we could see more coordination,
Okay.
increased military spending,
All right.
and a focus on developing the capabilities they lack.
Right.
It's about being less reliant
Yeah.
on the U.S.
Right. Not abandoning partnerships, but being more independent.
Exactly. Strategic autonomy.
And what about the economic front?
Yeah.
Could the trade conflicts actually be good in the long run?
It might seem counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but yeah, there could be benefits.
Okay.
Trade barriers with the U.S. could force Europe to diversify,
Right.
look for opportunities in other places,
Okay.
like Asia or Africa.
So instead of putting all their eggs in one basket,
Exactly.
they spread the risk,
Right.
open up new possibilities.
New avenues for growth, yeah.
Yeah. And what about innovation within Europe?
Oh, yeah, that too.
Competition from abroad.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe European companies would invest more in R&D,
Potentially, yeah.
leading to breakthroughs.
It's that necessity is the mother of invention idea.
Exactly.
Right.
And what about the political shifts?
Right.
The rise of populism and nationalism.
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It presents challenges to the status quo,
Right.
but it also forces mainstream parties to listen,
Okay.
to address issues they might have ignored.
So it's like a wake-up call
It is, yeah.
for the political establishment.
Exactly.
Okay.
They can't ignore people's anxieties anymore,
Right.
and that could lead to better democracies in the long run.
Right.
Of course, there's a fine line
Yeah.
between addressing concerns and pandering to populism,
Right.
but it could create a more vibrant political landscape.
It's like this whole hypothetical situation is shaking things up.
It is, yeah.
Security, economics, politics.
Yeah.
Europe has to confront these fundamental questions
Right.
about who it is,
Its identity.
its place in the world,
Yeah.
what kind of future it wants.
It highlights the potential for disruption and transformation,
Yeah.
but there's no guarantee of a happy ending.
Right.
It depends on how European leaders respond.
Right. It's not a simple problem with a solution.
No, it's not.
It's a maze
It is, yeah.
with lots of paths and outcomes.
Absolutely.
But at least we're thinking about the possibilities.
Yes, that's important.
So where do we go from here?
I think the key question is, what does all of this mean for Europe's role in the world?
Okay.
If a second Trump term leads to a more independent Europe,
Yeah.
how does that change the global balance of power?
Wow, that is a big question.
It
Now we're talking tectonic shifts.
Yeah, potentially.
We're so used to the U.S. being the dominant player.
Right.
What if Europe starts asserting itself more?
Exactly. It could lead to a more multipolar world
Okay.
with different centers of power and influence.
Right.
And that could change everything.
Yeah.
Global trade, climate change, international security,
Wow.
a fundamental reshaping of the global order.
It's almost hard to wrap my head around it.
I understand.
Does Europe become a rival to the U.S.?
It's possible.
Or do they find a new way to coexist?
It's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
A more independent Europe could lead to some friction,
Okay.
especially in areas like trade and technology.
Right.
But it could also lead to more collaboration
Oh.
on issues where they agree, like climate change
Yeah.
or counterterrorism.
So it's not just one side wins, one side loses.
You know, it's more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
It's about finding a new balance of power,
Right.
one that reflects the realities of the 21st century.
Right.
And it's not just about Europe and the U.S.
Right.
We have to think about China and Russia, too.
Oh, right. That dilemma.
Exactly.
How would a more independent Europe handle those relationships?
It's a tough balancing act.
Yeah.
Economic interests, security concerns, democratic values.
Yeah.
They have to find a way to engage strategically,
Okay.
leverage their economic power,
Yeah.
but also safeguard their security
Right.
and uphold their values.
It's like finding that sweet spot
That is.
between cooperation and competition,
Exactly.
between doing what's practical and what's right.
You got it.
Yeah.
And it's not just about governments either.
Right.
It's about civil society, businesses,
Mhm.
individuals,
Yeah.
people to people.
Mm.
Connections are crucial
That's so true.
for building trust and understanding.
Yeah. It's easy to get lost in the big picture,
Right.
but it's really about people.
It is. Their lives, their aspirations,
Yeah.
how they connect across borders.
And in a world that's more and more interconnected,
Yeah.
those connections are so important.
More important than ever.
So as we wrap up this deep dive
Right.
into this hypothetical second Trump term
Yeah.
and its impact on Europe,
Mm-hmm.
what's the main takeaway for our listeners? It feels like the biggest takeaway is that things are uncertain
Yeah.
and there's a lot of potential for change.
Absolutely.
This second Trump term could really force Europe
Yeah.
to rethink its place in the world,
Those roll, yeah.
how it relates to China and Russia,
Yeah.
even its own internal dynamics.
It's like we're watching a chrysalis, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Something new could emerge,
Right.
but we don't know what it'll look like.
It's unpredictable.
Exactly.
So let's talk about that transformation.
Okay.
What are the different paths Europe could take?
Well, if this were to happen, Europe would be at a crossroads.
Okay.
They could retreat inward,
Right.
become more fragmented,
Okay.
or they could use this as a chance to forge a new path.
Okay.
One marked by more independence,
Yeah.
more unity,
Okay.
a more assertive role on the world stage.
It's like Europe has to decide if it wants to be a passenger or a driver.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So for our listeners, the question is, what do you think Europe's role should be?
Right.
Should they go for more autonomy?
Right.
Or stick with the U.S. even if it gets tough?
It's a tough question.
It is. There are no easy answers.
No.
But it's worth thinking about.
As you think about that, I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay.
We focused on the challenges,
Yeah.
but we shouldn't forget about the opportunities.
I was hoping you'd say that
Yeah.
we've seen the dark side of the moon.
Right.
What about the bright side?
Exactly. Could this lead to a more dynamic Europe,
Okay.
a more innovative Europe? Could it force them to face their weaknesses
Right.
and come out stronger and more united?
Yeah.
Could this be what pushes Europe to really step onto the global stage?
It's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Maybe, but only time will tell.
Yeah.
The future isn't set.
Right.
It's shaped by the choices we make.
Well said. And on that note,
Yeah.
we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Okay.
But the conversation doesn't end here.
Right.
Keep exploring these issues.
Right.
Challenge your assumptions.
Exact.
Think critically about what's shaping our world.
It's a complex world.
It is. That's what makes it so interesting.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you for the next deep dive.
Sounds good.